Moving on now, and US President Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine are very close to a deal following a fresh round of Kremlin talks. Trump confirmed that his envoy Steve Witkoff met Russian President Vladimir Putin and described the meeting as pretty good. Here is what the US President has said.
Trade deals are going very well. I think Russia and Ukraine, I think they're coming along, we hope. They're fragile. They just left the meeting. I haven't been briefed yet, but I hear a pretty good meeting.
He added that most major points had been agreed upon and urged both sides to meet again at high levels to finish it off and stop the bloodshed now. The Kremlin also confirmed the talks, calling them constructive and very useful. Putin reportedly discussed the possibility of direct talks with Ukraine. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky firmly rejected any proposal that involves surrendering Crimea. Speaking in Kyiv, he declared Crimea belongs to Ukraine. Our position is unchanged. He emphasized that only the Ukrainian people can decide on territorial matters. Zelensky acknowledged Ukraine lacks the military strength to retake Crimea by force, but called for sanctions, economic pressure and diplomacy once a total ceasefire is in place. Here is what Zelensky said.
Наша позиція, вона незмінна, тільки український народ має право вирішувати, які території є українськими. Конституція України говорить, що всі тимчасово окуповані території, вони тимчасово окуповані. Вони всі належать Україні, українському народу. Україна не буде визнавати юридично будь-які тимчасово окуповані території.
Well, joining us to discuss all of the latest developments in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war is Professor Dr. Vasilin Ivanov-Popovsky, a professor and vice dean at the Jindal Global Law School, joining us from New Delhi. Professor Dr. Popovsky, thank you for joining us. Trump and the US seem optimistic over a peace deal, but without Ukraine at the negotiating table, how can any deal be close, as Trump has said?
Yes, obviously, for Donald Trump, it's always important to emphasize some positive news. He promised to deliver a peace, and he tried to say that he's doing the best, and for that matter, he will always sound positive. When he say very close, it's actually not very close. The position remain where they are. If we listen to the Russians and the Ukrainians, the fact that Steve Witkoff went to Moscow and meet and shake hands with Putin, in fact, didn't make the peace closer. However, we can think of a change in the politics in the United States, because now, and they are demanding not a 30-day ceasefire, but unconditional and unlimited in-time ceasefire. This is a good news for Ukraine, and somehow an invitation to consider. Ukrainians definitely would be interested in longer, even unlimited ceasefire, during which all the territorial issues, all the issues of lifting sanctions can be discussed.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, the Kyiv mayor, Klitschko, said yesterday that Ukraine may need to temporarily concede territory in order to get a peace deal over the line. If that's not Crimea, what would that mean?
Well, it's ambiguous, and there is also a language of de jure and de facto, if we see the US proposal brought to Moscow by Steve Witkoff. In fact, I would say nobody will reject the idea of kind of a de facto acknowledgement that these territories are under Russian occupation. It's a matter of fact. But recognizing Crimea de jure, which United States and Donald Trump is pushing, is obviously not on the table, and definitely Ukraine will reject that. Even that de jure recognition only by United States, nobody else in the world will recognize Crimea, by the way. It wouldn't change much in terms of international law if one country, United States, recognizes Crimea. And the rest of 119 countries do not recognize Crimea. By the way, it did happen in Western Sahara when, again, Donald Trump wanted to recognize Western Sahara as part of Morocco, and that very much pleased the Moroccans, but nobody else in the world followed up. Those things did happen. and they don't mean too much. Again, if the pressure is for all the other countries to recognize Crimea, here United States cannot achieve anything. Even Turkey will never recognize Crimea as Russian. So Donald Trump is trying to give a little bit of, how to say, chocolates to Moscow and to sound positive, but the real peace deal will be discussed probably longer and even less with the United States administration, because they prove to be very much far from the truth, far from the history. They don't understand what's going on in the world, and specifically they don't understand the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Yes, Professor Dr. Popovsky, as we finish our discussion, of course, it's not just the United States who are engaged in conversations around the Russia-Ukraine war. Given the fact that Zelensky has remained firm in the fact that he will not concede Crimea in any peace deal, what role could other countries and other leaders play in trying to get this over the line, notably the European allies, also Canada as well?
Well, these are the serious players, those who never change their mind over the next hours and days. We see a very consistent, over the last 11 years since the Crimean annexation, policy by the European Union, by Canada, by Australia, Japan, South Korea. A massive number of countries, more than 55 by the way, support Ukraine militarily, and over 100 countries support Ukraine politically. So it's not only Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is always first on the news because he changes his mind every day. And news agencies want to report scandals and change of mind. But the serious, consistent negotiators usually are behind the scene. They are not on the first pages of the newspapers, but these are the serious players. And well, I would suggest to watch what Macron, what Starmer in London, what many other serious politicians propose, and how the two sides, Russia and Ukraine, react.
Professor Dr. Popovsky, we do have a little bit more time. Of course, we have seen military action in recent days as well. Given the fact that Donald Trump has repeatedly echoed the opinion that Zelensky is partly or completely to blame for this war, and given the fact that there have been reported Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure, where do you think he's getting this opinion from? And do you think this is more of an appeasement measure to make sure Russia stay in these conversations?
Very difficult to judge what is in Donald Trump's mind. He wakes up in the morning with different ideas. He tweets all sorts of controversies. It's chaotic to follow even. I stopped following what Donald Trump says every day, by the way, because there is nonsense to follow that. The military attacks by Russia were serious, and a lot of civilians die, and that's what suggests that probably Russia is not ready for negotiations. Until Russia accepts a ceasefire, and hopefully a longer one, not only 30 days, there won't be any serious negotiations, any territorial issues, any discussions about lifting of the sanctions will not. And by the way, lifting of the sanctions, again, United States can lift some sanctions, but the rest of the world will not. And that will not be what Russia wants. A lot of the Russian assets are in Western banks, in Switzerland, in Britain, and other jurisdictions. So again, United States will face a very difficult task to persuade the rest of the world to do what Donald Trump is talking about, territorial concessions and lifting of the sanctions. So definitely it's a long process. There is a little hope here because finally we see the demand not to be 30-day ceasefire, rather to be unlimited and unconditional. Okay, let's put it this way. If Putin accepts that, that will be a serious progress and advancing a ceasefire during which all the other issues come on the table and they are discussed. I'm sure Ukrainians might have some concessions to make, but they cannot make those before Russia agree on long-term unconditional ceasefire.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, these meetings that have been taking place between US and Russian officials have given optimism to parties involved in these ceasefire talks. But Zelensky has taken a different approach and has proposed sanctions. He's proposed economic measures. Do you think that's a likely outcome given the positivity that the US side are showing on these talks that they're having privately with Russia?
In fact, sanctions already exist for a long time, much before Zelensky. They were imposed in 2014 after Crimea was annexed. And also, interestingly, there is a law in the United States adopted by the Congress in 2017 not to lift sanctions, and it is not only in Crimea and Russia, but also on Iran and North Korea. And only the Congress effectively can change that law. Now, Donald Trump can violate the law. He does it every day. He doesn't care about the Constitution, doesn't care about the laws of the United States. However, again, longer term, we can see a Congress in a couple of years reaffirming its own law accepted in 2017. So even if Donald Trump signed an executive order to lift the sanctions, this may change over the next 2 years. Again, I'm kind of cautious here to see much of a progress. So again, it's not Zelensky who demands sanctions. It is the majority of the world countries that imposed sanctions on Russia back in 2014, and none of those countries will recognize Crimea as a Russian territory. Donald Trump is talking, and those talks help because there is some dynamism here. We have some opportunity, let's put it this way, on the lower ranking officials between Russia and Ukraine to meet. And I will encourage those meetings face to face, which used to happen, by the way, in the beginning of the war in Istanbul and in Saudi Arabia. So some direct talk between Russian and Ukrainians are important. So for that matter, and for proposing a long-term ceasefire, I think the US administration may one day list some achievements and be recognized for that.
Professor Dr. Veselin Ivanov-Popovsky, thank you ever so much for staying with us.